If you like a bargain, I'm normally paid $25,000 US or more for giving this talk. I'm sure, but I was with Mary in Sydney and we were talking and she explained I'd never heard of the Justice Network for Tax, and so I was convinced it's a worthy organization. So I normally talk for 90 minutes and I explain, from the beginning to the end what it's like when you get in one of these situations where your life spirals out of control. Olympus, if you don't know it, you probably think it's a camera company, which it is, but its main business is endoscopes. These are the tubes they put in any natural orifice. And where there isn't a natural orifice with keyhole surgery, they can make one. And it's because of that factor, they have 70% of that market. They employ 45,000 people. It's one of Japan's top 50 companies and a world leader in healthcare. I joined when I was 21, and 30 years later, I became the first non-Japanese president. I'd run the companies in Europe, the United States, and finally the world, based in Tokyo. But 2 months after I was in Tokyo, I received an email from a friend who happens to be a board member of one of Japan's largest companies, better known than Olympus even, and he told me, have you seen this article in Factor? Never heard of Factor. It's a niche magazine which I thought was a sensationalist magazine when I first looked at the claims, because it said Olympus has spent $1.7 billion on the most questionable M&A practices. Now, Olympus's board was made up of men in their late 50s, 60s, and 70s, no women, and very conservative, all had been to the best universities in Japan, dark suits. The then president, Kikukawa-san, had been my favorite uncle, if you like. He had made me the president of Olympus of the Americas, very controversial in a Japanese company. The Americans didn't like it at all, a Brit coming over. Then I went to run Olympus Europe, and that was based in Hamburg, where I stayed for 8 years. That was a German company, principally. And then, to my great surprise, asked me to be his successor. And I really liked Kikukawa-san. He had the most charming smile. He had the physique of a jockey, very slight, very small, perfect English, had run the American company. I remember you mentioned my passion for road safety, running the Road Safety Foundation. And I remember when I was awarded an MBE for services to road safety, he I think thought it was a knighthood, and I didn't disabuse him of that fact. People called me sir for a while. But he was so happy, he organized a party in the most expensive Italian restaurant in Tokyo, and then gave me a Mont Blanc pen. I mean, he was so kind and generous. He knew the name of my wife, my children. I have a very domineering, bossy Spanish wife. He has a very deferential Japanese wife. And when I went on business trips, it was always a pleasure to eat in these nice restaurants. But he told me when he was at home and his wife went away, he had all his dinners put in little Tupperwares with labels, where I was using Deliveroo or whatever the takeaway was at that time. So I'd been with the company 30 years. I had a great affection for Kikukawa. This thing came out in Factor. I would never have known if it hadn't been for my friend. And that transpired to be a $1.7 billion fraud, the biggest fraud in Japan. It's known as the Enron of Japan. And in the question session we have at the end, there are issues, the role of the big four accounting firms, and 2 of them were involved in this story, or their Japanese practices were, the way they behaved. But I haven't got 90 minutes, so I just want to give you a flavor, a feel of what it's like and the way people behave. And the thing I got wrong, and it's perhaps my own ego, my own vanity, is that I thought, not the Japanese bad guys, if you like, but I thought my colleagues in this country, in Hamburg, in the United States, the people around me, the directors, and if you saw my family album, you would see several of the British directors, with my children as babies. I mean, I was very close to these people. They were all well paid, all had contracts with at least 2 years protection, whatever happened, and they helped me expose the fraud. 2 of them are chartered accountants. But it was when it was exposed how people move away, how isolated you are. And that's what I got wrong, the way people act. And these guys and women were no different to you, I don't think. You don't know until you're tested. They would say in their defense, my priority is my family. I have to look after my family, my nuclear family. But the way people move is extraordinary. I would never have thought that these men and women who were highly paid, I'd been their sponsors, would just leave you when the shit hits the fan. But the one scene I'd like to show you is really when I first challenged Kikukawa. Kikukawa was the president, had been the president for 10 years, at the time was 73 years old, had been with the company all his life. And I had gone out with him, it was the 2nd of August, 2011, and we'd gone out in the morning for a meeting at 8 o'clock with Japan's largest electrical retailer, a bit like Dixon's in this country, or MediaMarkt in Germany, or Best Buy in the US. And I liked this company because the founder and chairman was very altruistic. I don't believe in inherited wealth. He didn't. He'd set up all sorts of charitable foundations. And in Japan, when you have a business meeting, you don't talk about business at that level. I wanted to tell him about the new Pen F Micro Four Thirds camera, which is retro-styled and a beautiful camera. But I knew we wouldn't talk about it. So we had this meeting. I'd only been the president since April the 1st, so 3 months in. And the week before, I'd found out about this story in Factor. But I hadn't spoken about the president. I'd been in Europe when I found out. I'd only got back to Japan the night before. So we met at 8 o'clock. In Japan, the board of Japan, we all have our limousine. I did suggest trying to be eco-friendly, that when we had a meeting with the board, we should share cars, at least share cars, and I was quickly told that's not the way. I had the second best car on the fleet, a black Lexus. I did ask for a Jaguar, as I had in Europe, but they didn't allow me to have that. The president, Kikukawa-san, had more bells and whistles, a special phone system he had, I remember. So we met at 8 o'clock, and the meeting was very cordial. It was conducted in Japanese, although all the people there spoke English, and there was a translator for me, because I'm not a linguist, unfortunately, typically English. And near the end of the meeting, in Japan you give gifts, and the chairman of the retailer store opened up this red blotting pad and took out 2 tickets for a big baseball game in Tokyo, and gave me 2, and then he passed another 2 to Kikukawa-san. And just in my poor Japanese, as I'm going to say thank you, I saw from the peripheral of my vision Kikukawa's hand come in and take the 2 tickets out of my hand and put them to join his 2. And he then switched into English, strangely for my benefit, to explain to the chairman that Michael's English and he likes soccer. He doesn't like baseball. Now, I'd worked in the States. We did a lot of research in Boston, Mass, and been to see the Red Sox, and I like any big event in Japan. And it's just the rudeness, and you wouldn't do that to anyone, would you? Physically take the tickets. And I had seen a different side since I'd been in Japan in those 3 months. I'd known Kikukawa for about 30 years. But when I was in Tokyo at the board meetings, with simultaneous translation, this smiling, charming man, if any of the other directors made even the most nuanced difference of opinion, he would be ruthlessly cut them down. I mean, he really was, I came to realize, the emperor, all-powerful, surrounded by sycophants. I was allowed to rattle on and be as controversial as I liked. I hadn't had to change my behavior. But it was evident that he had a side to him which I hadn't realized, and that small taste of it on that meeting. So the meeting ends at 9 o'clock. I thought, because this thing was out in Factor, it's in the public domain, you can buy Factor in Shinjuku, where Olympus has its world headquarters, on the newsstand outside. It's an online journal, but with hard copies too. And I thought at the end of this meeting, he'd say, come and have some tea and tell me what was going on, because I simply didn't believe Olympus would do anything dishonest. I mean, I didn't think that these guys at the board had the color to do anything dishonest, never mind do anything dishonest. But nevertheless, it's quite serious. If you know, can you imagine it in this country? If a FTSE 100 company, or a DAX company in Germany, or a Nasdaq company, or you know, a large listed company in any jurisdiction, if allegations were made like this, it would go into the mainline media, never mind just the financial media. But he didn't invite me for tea. He got in his car to go back to our corporate headquarters called the Monolith building. Funny choice of name for corporate headquarters. And I followed to travel through the Tokyo rush hour traffic, 45 minutes or so, in the car behind. And I was seething, by the man's rudeness, but that he didn't tell me what was going on. You know, where's this 1.7.5 billion? So I phoned my secretary, Machiko, up, and she's a lovely lady. She was joined just as I became the president. She was a former stewardess for Cathay Pacific. She was a purser in the first class cabin. And whilst I might not believe in inherited wealth, I did enjoy private jets and champagne and nice hotels. But Machiko really should have been the president. She was bright, intuitive, instinctive, and could read people. And at any meeting or whatever, she would tell me in very succinct terms, watch this person. This person is, you know, talks too much. This person is dishonest. Whatever. She was wonderful, and she became the person closest to me and helped me in the months I was there. And I'll always have a great fondness. But I regret my abruptness, but I said, Machiko, I do need to see Chairman Kikukawa. He became chairman when I became president, today. And she said, oh, Michael, you would like to see the chairman at his earliest convenience. And she was trying to tell me, as she did so many times, the protocols of Japan. Whilst I was the president, I did not tell the former president, and now chairman, to meet me at my convenience. And she just wanted to present it in the right way. And I said, no, Machiko, I need to see him today. And she said, you want me to stress it's very important, and you'd like to see him as soon as possible. She really tried. And I was so preoccupied with it, I snapped back at her, I want to see him today, Machiko. Please organize it. I don't care what time. And I'd like to see him with Mori-san. Mori-san was number 3. He was, in effect, the chief financial officer of the company. And, you know, when you feel down the phone when someone is flat. And it wasn't because she was rude, I'd been rude or abrupt. It was because she thought I was going to hurt myself. And she said, okay, right. And the phone went down, and I was watching Kikukawa's, it was 2 or 3 vehicles ahead, and I saw him pick up, he'd had in his phone, we all had mobile phones, but he'd had an analog phone fitted in the car. Maybe he thought it gave you brain cancer or something, but I don't know why he had this thing. And then his head was nodding. I could see the back of his head, clearly agitated, and I presumed it was my call. My mobile rings, and it's Machiko. Michael, I've spoken to Mr. Kikukawa's secretary, who's spoken to Mr. Kikukawa. Mr. Kikukawa is very busy today, but because you're so insistent, and she highlighted the word insistent, he will see you at 12 noon in room G372. And I could tell, and I felt uncomfortable, but what's this $1.7 billion? You know, I was starting to believe there was something in it now. So we get there, 12 noon, and I get into the room. I come in from the left, and there is the board. You can be Mr. Kikukawa. You're Mr. Mori. You just need to move away a bit, Mary. Just 2 people in a long board table. And I come in. Kikukawa, this has a smile like yours, very charming, smiling away. Please sit down, Michael. You're typically Japanese. It's not a bad manners or anything, but you don't give anything away with your facial characteristics. You know, you do when you go out to the bar at night, but not in the day. And I walk in, and the first thing I notice is a large platter of sushi. And my favorite food in Japan is sushi. And these phones go off all the time, don't they? Next, where I was going to sit in the center was a tuna sandwich, a manky-looking tuna sandwich. It wasn't even, you know, no crisps or salad on next to it. If you know Japan, non-verbal communication is a big thing. I mean, that sandwich had been bought in Café Poisson in the subterranean shopping mall. You know, you would never in Japan, probably Korea is similar, you'd never serve to the president or anyone a sandwich in a cling film. And it was to tell me that in Olympus, knowing that sushi was my favorite food, that I'm the manky tuna sandwich, and you, Kikukawa-san, is the luxury sushi platter. And that platter would have cost around $2,000. It had a little flag in it telling me it was from the most prestigious fish stall in Tokyo Fish Market. This was before the fish market moved. And it threw me, it just disorientated me. So I come in, you're smiling away, and I say, Kikukawa-san, what's this? And I showed him the Factor magazine. And he said, yeah, well, it's an article. And I said, is it true? And he said, some of it. And then I started to push you. And you said, calm down, Michael, calm down. Now, I'm a Liverpudlian, I've lost my accent, but you don't tell a Scouser to calm down. If you're English, you'll understand that's the worst thing. And I hadn't even got going, never mind calm down. And I said, Tom, I was the only person who could call him Tom. It wasn't his name, but my pronunciation of his real name. He told me to call him Tom years earlier. Tom, I have to understand this. I'm the person who has to sign the company's accounts. I'm the person who has to sign the letter of representation. And you said, Michael, this is just a domestic matter. Please don't worry about it. And I said, I am worried about it. And can I suggest, he became evasive, his left eye, while smiling, his left eyebrow started to shake. Can you do that?
No. Come on.
These South Koreans are hopeless, aren't they? I mean, you can't be my act again. I said, can I meet alone with Mori-san? Now, he didn't like that. You and I got on well. We always talked about American politics. Very quiet. No. Cerebral, intelligent. You're foxy, you're instinctive. You didn't get where he was, but you couldn't stop me. You reported to me. So you huffed and puffed and left the room. You can just move away a bit. Exit stage left. So I come to you, and the first thing you say is, Michael, let's have a toilet break. You never say that in Japan. Why would you? So off we go to the executive urinals. Normally the men would tell when you're next to someone, you always talk if you know them. Wasn't that a great match last night? Or, the Lionesses should have won, or whatever we might have said. But nothing, silence. Came back, you sat in front of the untouched luxury sushi platter, me in front of the tuna sandwich. And I said to you, Mori-san, who and what is all of this? And I started to go through the 3 allegations. Olympus had bought these Mickey Mouse companies, a face cream company. And I said, why have we bought a face cream company? It was a shell company. And you said, well, it's good for business expansion. Well, now we were a digital optical company. They'd bought a microwave dish company. And I said, why have we bought a microwave dish company? And you ignored me. You just glanced off you, but you stopped not answering my questions. So I started laughing. It's like a black comedy. And pushed you. And now you chose to answer. You said it helps people with diabetes. What a load of bollocks. And I got angry. I really got angry. And I came around the table. And you stood up. Now, you don't do this in Japan. You don't get close to people. And you don't stand up. And I shouted at you, who do you work for, hey? And this calm, cerebral man, and I'll never forget till the moment I die, your facade dropped, and you used your finger to tell me the answer. And I thought you would say, I work for you, Michael, I work for Olympus, but you didn't. You said, I work for Kikukawa-san! I'm loyal to Kikukawa-san! Like that. And what do? I was shocked, and I just walked away, and I knew there and then, by the way you had behaved and you'd behaved, there was something rotten at the top of this corporation of 45,000 people, of which I was the president, and I had no idea what to do. And that's really just the start of the story. So you'll have to buy the book. Exposure, it's called. I've had my 20 minutes.